All righty. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our summer edition of Virtual Coffee with Consulting. My name is Jerry Manter, Marketing and Communications Specialist here at Zazio. Appreciate everyone registering for today's conversation. Leading the presentation will be two familiar faces, Rick Serber and Jennifer Chadband. They are co-managers of our amazing consulting department. And joining them today will be Zazio General Counsel, Will Fletcher. We invite you to submit your questions via the chat window on your screen, and we'll, of course, follow up with you. And please don't forget to take our survey after the presentation. We love hearing your feedback and appreciate your insight. And that's about all for me. And for now, I will hand things off to Jennifer, who will get us started.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today for Virtual Coffee. We are very excited to have Will Fletcher, Zazio's General Counsel, join us today for this session, talking about policies and RIM policies as well, strategies for writing, training, and enforcement. This is something that we have a lot of questions that come up from our clients, and it's definitely within our wheelhouse. Working on policies, and I'm really excited for him to share his insights and really valuable experience with our audience today. I think it'll be a good discussion. So if this is your first time joining Virtual Coffee, I just wanted to provide a quick rundown of kind of how we do things here. First of all, it's not very formal, as you can see by our attire. I hope everybody's brought a coffee. It's going to be a really hot day here in Boise, Idaho. Wherever you are, maybe it's iced coffee or whatever your beverage of choice might be. We'd like to keep our forum pretty casual, conversational in nature, but of course we also like to kind of guide our conversation with slides, and Will's put some really great slides together today for our presentation to kind of help us go through it. So myself, my name's Jennifer Chadband. I am co-manager of our consulting division here with Zazio. I've been with Zazio going on almost 13 years now, really focusing on this niche area of RIM and IG and all the different types of legal citations and record keeping requirements. And my co-manager here, Rick Serber, he also manages the legal research division, populating all of those wonderful citations in one of our flagship software. And also he is working within the division to advise on different client projects and matters. So with that, I wanted to give Will a chance to introduce himself and his background and how it kind of brought him into, or how we convinced him, I should say, to join us today for this presentation. So with that, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, Will.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jen and Rick. Really appreciate you inviting me on Virtual Coffee. I'm excited to be here. So most of you are well familiar with Zazio's consulting services. Zazio was founded as a software company, and of course, is a software and consulting company. The organization has all of the usual internal functions, HR, etc. And I mention that to say that even as a smaller organization, we still have a lot of policies, internal policies governing the work we do, from software development, records and information management on the internal side. And so as Zazio's general counsel, I've had the pleasure over the last, during my time here, of working with all of Zazio's departments, developing and implementing our many corporate policies, and have learned some very valuable lessons along the way, and am delighted to be here today to share with you some of our stories from the trenches here, developing and maintaining policies here at Zazio. Next slide, please. So real quick, our legal disclaimer.
Practice what we preach, right? Well, with policies.
Yes, exactly. Our legal disclaimer, no need to belabor that. go on to the next slide. Actually, flip 2 ahead, please. Without any further ado, time for a quick truth check. Whether you know it, realize it, like it or not, chances are that your stakeholders are suspicious of your corporate policies and your RIM policy in particular. Policies generally tend to be dense. They are verbose, kind of written like legal documents or sometimes even military field manuals. Not the most exciting thing to read and try to understand. And our stakeholders often view them as very command and control. Here's what you're supposed to do, but we're not going to exactly make it easy for you to read and tell what you're supposed to do. And most people don't like being ordered around and appreciate when they are given instructions that they be clear, easy to understand, easy to digest. So the other thing I'd mention is that when writing policies, as policy writers, we tend to write selfishly. And what I mean by that is we write what we want to say and don't step back and think about it from the perspective of our audience. What do they want to hear? Next slide, please. The point of today's presentation is to flip things around. This presentation is about making policies that your stakeholders would like to read, that they are that are easy to understand, and that they are excited about getting to know and following. And so the first concept I want to discuss today is the concept of design thinking. Maybe you've heard of it in other contexts. It's used often by engineers, and so I'll give the analogy of the airplane. You know, the classical way of thinking is let's design the airplane, and then we'll put it out there in the market, and our customers, our users, will figure out how to use it. Design thinking flips it around and says, okay, to design the airplane, let's put ourselves in our customer's perspective. You know, what do our airlines need that are going to buy this thing? What are the passengers? How are they going to view the airplane from their perspective? So you ask, who's my audience? Really putting yourself into their shoes and asking questions like, what problems are they going to have? What is their problem, and how can I help them solve that problem? What are the best outcomes that I can expect from this policy, and what do I need to say to achieve that outcome? And so it just puts you in a stakeholder frame of mind, and I submit that the end product is something that's much more warmly welcomed from your stakeholder and is easier to navigate. Rick and Jen, anything to add at this point in time?
I think the principle that I'm thinking of that really applies also is, how it can be helpful. I think it's really important to explain how a RIM policy or even a procedural document like a records retention schedule will help improve an employee's day-to-day and not add more time-consuming obligations. Because I feel like that's the perception, is that these are just things I have to do in addition to my normal job. But I think the reality is, these things are meant to make things more efficient for everyone and make information more accessible and protect it and all of the things that they do. And so reinforcing that, and unfortunately we're dealing with RIM, at least, the perception that these might be administrative obligations or inferior obligations. But as RIM professionals, we know that records information management, it's one of the organization's most important asset. but not everybody is enthusiastic as us, and so it's a reality we have to face. But part of our job is convincing people that if you take on some of these principles, it's going to make your life easier, everyone's life easier, really. And I think that's true of policies in general, really. Generally preventing the bad things that policies are designed to prevent. It's usually going to be helpful. Cybersecurity, for example, it would be stressful and painful to be to have responsibility for the repercussions of not following a cybersecurity policy. And so, even illustrating that compliance and following these things are to your benefit, I think are good principles to reinforce.
No, those are excellent points. Thank you for that, Rick. And I guess to add to your comments about making the policy helpful, one of the things we'll talk about today to make your policy helpful and really invite compliance is tying it into your organization's mission. And you made the comment about the perception among our stakeholders that your RIM is really an administrative and inferior obligation, and so this is grunt work we're asking you to suffer through. And so you've really got to make an effort in your policy and also in how you implement it and train on it and communicate it. Is how does this support the organization's mission? So, for example, if you're a philanthropic organization, you raise a lot of money from your outside stakeholders, and put those funds into mission-driven causes. Our records, our information, really, that's the information that we use to carry out that mission, to accomplish those goals. And so, and we're collecting a lot of sensitive information in those records, whether it's donor information or information about the internal workings of the organizations we're contributing that money to, that is good information, but we don't want out in the public. So keeping a clean house where RIM is concerned really allows us to accomplish that mission, to protect our sensitive information, to timely dispose of it, and to ensure that it's available to our internal stakeholders when they need it and where they need it. So
and just really quick, I guess and I know maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but which part of the policy do you think is most, kind of important as far as conveying that value that the policy offers, or just making that very clear? Is that just right off the bat?
Yes, we will, and we'll talk about that further. That's an excellent question, Jen. The way I like to structure a policy is you have 4 basic sections. You have your purpose statement right up top. That really says what is the purpose of this policy, this RIM policy, and that's where you tie it into the organization's mission. Your scope section, which just defines, okay, who and where does this apply, and then you get into your policy statements, and we'll talk about this more later. I like to, I think any term in your policy that isn't generally understood, that there's any questions that will be misconstrued, it's a term of art, it's helpful to define those. And a lot of folks are, they'll put their definitions throughout the policy document. I think that's a little distracting. Other folks will put it as their first part of the policy. I think that, when you see that just is kind of doesn't set the right tone. I prefer to put that at the end, after your policy statement, after your purpose, your scope, your policy, and so that when folks read through that policy and get to a capitalized defined term, they can then reference down to the definition section. So those are the 4 portions of a policy, and again, your purpose statement is your opportunity to really connect the policy to your organization's mission.
Perfect. I'll hold tight when we get to that section.
Okie dokie. I guess, you know, on a related point to all that, is being mindful of your tone. I mentioned earlier that you know, policies are often written as like they come off as a legal document or, you know, a military field manual. You know, the tone just isn't inviting. And so I think the most effective thing to do in your policy is to really write with a positive tone and you know, one that communicates. You know, you're communicating conversationally. You kind of give a vibe that says to your stakeholders, I trust you, you're smart, you're capable, I'm confident in your abilities. Here are the tools that you will need to continue to carry out your job effectively, rather than, you know, you're having a conversation with them rather than talking at them or
commanding,
instructing them. Yeah, commanding, exactly. That's a good, and you know, on the topic of tone, I think this is a good opportunity to test out your generative AI. You know, if you've written a policy draft and are concerned about that tone, maybe feed it into generative AI tool and ask it, you know, to analyze that tone and offer suggestions to improve it for various things. So just yeah, just a thought there. So I guess next slide, we'll go into
really quick, Will.
Oh yes, yes.
Talking about tone. I know that like some policies that I've seen, they'll have kind of a provision, you know, this is what will happen if you don't follow this policy, you know, almost kind of, you know, very succinctly, like up to termination even.
Stick.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think that that's always necessary to include within a policy and the ramifications of not complying with it? Thinking about this positive tone aspect.
You know, I guess I'll give the classic lawyer answer of it depends, but my general thoughts are that that's understood. A lot of organizations will have a master policy. It'll be in your employee handbook that folks review that, you know, kind of give that stern warning that, you know, if under the right circumstances, if you don't follow this policy, it could cost you your job. I don't think it's necessary, especially in a RIM policy. I think that's implied by your policy. If you've drafted it well, it's stated elsewhere. And you know, by including it, and I see it included with every section in some policies, and I just think that goes too far and can help ruin your positive tone that you're trying to set. But there are circumstances where you might include it, and you just kind of have to use your best judgment under the circumstances. But my general thought is that most of the time it's unnecessary.
Okay.
It feels to me like that kind of a statement is talking past people instead of talking to them, which is what you're really reinforcing, Will. I mean, people aren't, you know, not filing records in appropriate places and thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't file this record, I might lose my job. You know, it's just, it doesn't really resonate. You know, it's the why shouldn't be do it, you know, do it because you'll get fired. It should be do it because so you can find it, so other people can find it, so that it helps people understand where the information and records live within your organization, and everyone has full access and can use the records they need. So
I think that's well said, Rick. Very well said, and exactly right. One thing I'd add is on this issue of setting the right tone. So in my house, we're watching House of Dragons right now, season 2, really getting into it. And
2 thumbs up.
You know, you'll notice if you're a fan as well, or watch the previous show, Game of Thrones, you know, you'll see how the royals really speak in kind of that royal tone to their subject. That's, you know, talking at them, giving them orders. It's not very welcoming or friendly. I think the approach to take is to think more of your stakeholders as your customers. You know, you really don't take them for granted. You really have to earn and keep their business.
Mm-hmm.
Do that by setting the right tone.
I like that. Yeah, I really like that.
Okay, so some just general tips in policy drafting. Of course, we're talking about RIM policies, but this can really apply to any policy. Let's talk about the fog of words. You know, again, we'll go back to a lot of policies are written that like they're legal documents. I don't think they have to be written in that manner. And you know, they tend to be very verbose. And we do that to try to make them exacting. More often than not, I think that verbose style just adds ambiguity. It doesn't communicate clearly. So, you know, avoid the fog of words. Brevity is your friend. Short does not mean shallow. Short, I think it means more precise. It makes it more accessible to your stakeholders. So avoid the fluff. Now, writing your first draft, and this is the case with me for sure, it's going to be pretty verbose. That is fine. The you know, where your brevity comes is in the editing process. You know, most of writing, policy creation including, is going to be in the editing process. So it's okay to have that verbose first draft, scrutinize it for those extra words, and really make it as short and sweet, succinct as possible. And that goes with, you know, your sentence length too. I'm sure we've all seen policies where, you know, one sentence will carry on for 3, 4, 5 lines. Short sentences, simple sentences are better. You know, if your sentence is 5 lines in that first draft, that's okay. Look for opportunities to break it up into 2, 3 sentence. Same with paragraph. We've seen the policy. I'm sure that a paragraph will stretch for an entire page, and that just doesn't make for easy accessibility. And I think the general rule is 5 sentences is a long paragraph. You know, 1 sentence. A paragraph can also be 1 sentence. Look for opportunities to break that up. So a concept I want to introduce here, talk about, is fight or flight. We're all familiar with you know, the idea of your fight or flight response. Where, you know, your kind of primitive brain encounters a situation and instantly decides based on instinct, and real quick without you even thinking about it, do I want to stay and fight and solve the problem, or is this one where to solve the problem I'm just going to run away? And I think that that instinct very much is present when we read a policy. Your brain, it's gonna, you know, just instinctively encounter situations where it triggers that fight or flight in looking at the page. And so our job here is to craft our policy both in substance, style, but also visually, to not trigger that fight or flight response. So
almost making a good first impression, like
good first
okay,
impression.
I can do this.
Exactly, yes. And so brevity, short sentences, short paragraphs, breaking things up, use of a lot of white space, dead space, are great tools to use to avoid that fight or flight response, because, you know, once that's triggered, the tendency is to either just not read it or gloss over it and not get the substance of it or misinterpret it. So that's, you know, one of the main things we're trying to do, and how we craft this policy is to make it inviting rather than triggering that fight or flight response. That once you've hit that, you know, you're done. Your reader is not going to take the time to try to understand your policy and really want to work with it instead of against it.
Yeah, it's great. And I know we're talking about like a policy or drafting a policy, but like the average individual within an organization, I mean, there's a lot of policies that we're always looking through, right? I mean, it's your records management policy, it's your IT policies, your cybersecurity and policies all across the board. So I think that resonates with me in particular, especially just thinking about the volume that of policies that we're under and responsible for, and have to read and follow and understand just consistently.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think that, oh, go ahead, Will.
No, go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to say that I think that our clients agree with this. It's a really common request that we have to optimize records management policies. And by far the most impactful thing we do is cut down, the size of these things just based on simplifying them. A lot of it is tightening up on the wording and removing duplicative and unneeded language. On a similar note, it's the same thing for procedural level and guideline level documents related to records management too. Even the records retention schedule, what we're doing is the same logic applies. We're simplifying, removing duplication, consolidating. It's all part of the same concept of making things easier for people to understand and really cleaning up that language and making it tight.
Those are excellent points. And Rick, did you tell me that you encountered a RIM policy that was over 100 pages long?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and we cut it down to like 15, which might have even been too long.
That goes back to the fight or flight. If you put a 100-page policy on my desk, I am going to skim it really quickly or head for the hills.
I'm going to assume it's a reference manual and only look at it when I feel like something I need to look up. There's something I need to look up about.
And I think that you mentioned you were able to cut it down to 15 pages. I think that's not going to be uncommon. Where you're, if you really get down to the meat of things, stick only to what you need to say. One, again, that makes it more impactful, and they're actually going to, your stakeholders are actually going to get from it what they need to get from it. But you'll often find those opportunities where you can cut out 4/5 of it and still say what you need to say.
Yeah, similar thing with retention schedules. We've had retention schedules come in at 5,000 plus categories of records, and we cut that particular one down to about 350, which was still too long. Like, we're really looking these days to get down to 1 to 150, and those, it's different for every organization, of course, but even getting below 100 is amazing if we can do it.
Excellent. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we'll march through some examples incorporating some of these ideas we've been talking about brevity and organization. So here's a great example. The sentence, with record-setting temperatures besetting the West and Central United States and local highs in the triple digits, I'm going to avail myself of the nearest air conditioning. Okay, that that might be what I write on a first draft, but upon editing, do I sacrifice any meaning by simply saying it's hot, I'm going inside? I would argue you really don't. That conveys the point, and that's where you want to leave it. And so look for these opportunities in editing your RIM policy documents and other documents to really just cut to the chase and move on. Next slide, please.
That looked like a quote from House of Dragons.
that's
except for the United States part.
Some more tips. Active voice versus passive voice. A tendency for many writers, myself included, especially when you're dealing with more technically oriented subjects, is to default to the passive voice, which, the example here, you must file records. That's, again, fine on your first draft, but when you're editing, really scrutinize for use of passive voice and switch it to active voice. I'm sorry, yeah, records must be, you say you must file records, active voice, instead of records must be filed, the passive voice. It's really, it speaks better to the stakeholder, the person reading it. It's more direct, conveys the point better, and it's less prone to ambiguity when you say things in that active voice for the instead of the passive voice. I'm a big fan of big font. You can see my cheaters. You know, that's for a reason, but I think just in general, you know, font is, you know, you go into, we'll call it resume writing mode, where you shrink the font to 10 and try to cram as much as you can on a single page to keep it to a single page. That triggers that fight or flight response when we're looking at just a ton of small text. I think the body of your document, 12 point, is great. Headlines, 14 points. And you know, in Word, page break is your friend. If I, you know, am addressing one topic and I get 3/4 of the way down the page, it's perfectly all right to page break there and save the following topic for the next page rather than including only a portion of it.
I've got a question for you, Will.
Oh, yeah.
Do you do this too? You know, and I ask you this because you proof a lot of my writing, and you're always catching me on passive. In your first edits, are you catching yourself writing passively as well, or are you to the point now that you can just write actively?
Yes and no. I think I'm better at it, being mindful of it, but by no means am I anywhere near perfect. And so, you know, you just kind of try to condition yourself to think in that active voice. If you get there 50% of the time on your first draft, you're probably doing great.
That's encouraging.
So, yeah, even the best writers, you know, that know the power of active voice over passive voice are still going to write a lot of things. And again, especially with these technically oriented topics, that's just kind of the way our brain defaults to. So, you know, don't sweat it too much. But
you've got a previous career in like editing and writing as well, even before you went to law school, isn't that right?
Yeah, I started out in photography. Was on my college newspaper as a photographer and started spending time with all these newspaper reporters and decided I liked that better. And so switched to newspaper writing, and actually my first job after undergraduate was as a newspaper writer
Nice.
for a small paper in Colorado for a little over a year before starting law school. So yeah, that was a good trial by fire on how to write effectively and succinctly.
That makes sense.
Okie dokie. Okay, continuing on our theme of brevity, use your short, familiar single words. And here's some classic examples that I see where, you know, we, instead of saying a number of, we can simply say many. Instead of saying at this point in time, just say now. Instead of saying in order to, simply say to. It's just as effective. And then on using your simple words, don't say, here's the most common example I see, don't say utilize when you can simply say use. They're the same thing, and use is much more accessible to your reader. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Oh, next one. I'm sorry, we skipped over a slide. Headlines. These are often overlooked. I think headlines are an excellent opportunity to do a number of things. One, they're not just, you know, bookmarks marking the next section of your policy. These, you can use your headlines to engage and inform. And so we've a few examples here. You know, the first section of our policy where we're talking about archiving non-active records, that's fine. That's short. That lets you, or that introduces the subject of your next topic. Here's another example that I think is better. To archive non-records, here's what you do. So that's, again, letting your reader know, okay, we're going to talk about archiving non-active records, and I am going to let you know exactly what you need to do to solve that problem. Asking questions, using your headlines to ask questions is another, I think, great tool to draw your reader in, put them at ease. How do I archive a non-active record? I mean, that's the question your policy, your stakeholders are asking when they refer to that section. Let them know that, you know, you're asking the same question, and here is the answer. So don't overlook your headlines as a tool to persuade, inform, and invite. Next slide, please. Okay, so continuing on the theme of headlines, now that you've got your engaging headline, you can then skip as the first sentence in your policy, the long, dry statement, letting them know this section describes the types of records that would satisfy the requirements to be considered non-active records as would exist in the accounting department. Your headline already told them that. That's completely unnecessary and does nothing to really advance your cause and simply puts your reader off that's what they're greeted with. So skip those kind of sentences, the throat clearing, we call them, entirely, and just go straight to the meat of things. Next slide, please. One of my favorite topics is avoiding business jargon in your policies. You know, it's these kind of jargony terms are everywhere. They've invaded the office. They've invaded how we think, how we act. I certainly default to using them. That's okay. Learn to spot them in your editing, and ruthlessly edit them out. The problem with business jargon is that you may think, well, the reason they started is they're supposed to be kind of general umbrella terms to describe an array of situations, and because of that, they can be very ambiguous. It was also a shortcut. Instead of saying something more precise, because that takes energy and effort to craft that statement, you default to a business jargon term that just adds ambiguity. So do not use them unless absolutely necessary in your policy, because they don't inform, they invite ambiguity, and I just don't think they communicate expertise. So and that's what you want to come across. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think we use them, is they sound great, they sound jazzy, fancy, they communicate authority and expertise, but in practice, I think they tend to do the opposite thing. So next slide, please.
There's really quick on that one. There's also a lot of industry specific jargon that we have in RIM. And, while it's all right, I think to use that jargon when we're talking amongst ourselves, these policies that we're designing aren't meant for other RIM practitioners. They're meant for employees, normal users. And so I think that's another thing to be careful of. Things that that have perfect meaning to us and we understand with some certainty, like even disposition or different things like that. They should really be looked at, and that's one of those things where running editions by maybe people that don't have that expertise and having them try to point out the words that are unclear or jargony, so that you can refine those. I think that's another good thing to be considerate of.
No, that's
saying I can't put silo in my policy.
Silo.
Right?
It's another.
And to your point, Rick, I guess two things. If that's the term that instantly comes to mind, okay, write it down, stop there, and think, okay, what precisely am I trying to say, and then say that. Also, if it is, one of those terms that's, a term of art in your industry, consider defining it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's helpful. That way there's no room for misinterpretation and ambiguity. Okay, so here is a page from one of our past records and information management policy that just puts into practice some of the things we've been talking about. We have our purpose and scope statements, the first two portions of a policy that I recommend, followed by your actual, policy content and then your definitions. Lots of use of white space. Bullet points, another excellent tool that you can use to kind of break out those dense, complex subjects and really make them easy to understand and inviting.
And this might sound a little silly, Will, but is it ever appropriate to include like colors or visuals in your policy? Because I know a lot of people are visual. I am, and I don't know. Is that even something that anybody does?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was like I said, I was a photographer at one point in time in my prior life, so I'm a very visual person. I think that's a great tool. And from the law, in some contexts, you'll even see folks incorporating that into contracts, legally binding documents that will rely on visuals, especially where you're dealing with, other parties that, there aren't lawyers on the other side. These are some of your consumers, and if a visual conveys the point, this is the question you have to ask. It's not always appropriate to use a visual,
right?
But ask yourself, does this communicate the point? Does this reinforce the point I'm trying to make? Is it ambiguous? Can it be misconstrued? And if the answer is yes, it furthers my point, and no, I don't think it creates ambiguity, I'd say it's great.
Yeah.
Use that if it's okay to use that emoji here and there in your RIM policy.
I like it.
Just be careful of the thumbs up emoji. Can go both ways, right?
Maybe your records retention schedule is a great area to try and incorporate visuals.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we talked about definitions. Here's an example that I've tried to work with, the definition of records management. Here's one definition that I've seen around that, 4 lines, kind of written, like a term in a legal statute or a contract. A lot of different things going on here. I tried to just really distill it down to its essence. Excuse me, got it to a line and a half, and simply say records management is the discipline of systemically analyzing and controlling information the organization uses. And I kind of waffled on even using systemically. I think there's an argument to be made that you don't even need that. It's implied. I took out the word specialized discipline. I think a discipline by its very nature is going to be specialized, and it doesn't really add much to the equation by keeping that in there. And so, my argument here is that we've used far less words. It's way more easy to digest, way more inviting to look at, and we haven't sacrificed any meaning. So look for opportunities to really distill down these definitions to their essence.
I like it.
Okay. Excuse me. Well, next slide, please. Okay, and here is our definition of record, which you will no doubt be defining in your RIM policy. 5 sentences long as it started. Kind of done some reorganization here and breaking up. And so, the outline that I follow here is in your organization, and this applies to both your policy as a whole, your different policy sections, and incorporated even in your definition, is to start with the general, move on to the exceptions, then state any conditions, and then state anything else that might be helpful, instead of needing to cram all those things into one fluid statement. Break them up. And so, we have a short, succinct description of what a record is. Here's some blank space. Here's some examples. Yes, they can be paper or electronic. I kind of wrestled on even including that. I think that's implied from the statement in any media or format. And then here's some counter examples that aren't records.
You would be surprised though on the media thing, Will. I think it is good to keep that in, just because it's a common thing that our clients are facing, is that users don't understand that we're not just dealing with paper records. So,
and that's a great point, Rick. I think there's that just calls into the need to make everything there's rules, and rules are made to be broken, and there's exceptions to all. And so of course, in that situation where you really need to emphasize that extra point with your stakeholders, do it. But the important part is asking those questions. Okay. Rick and Jen, I've talked a lot. Do you have anything else to add at this point? I think we have about 15 minutes left.
Yeah, I do. So, one of the things I think that we hear a lot, and this comes up in various contexts really, but, kind of change management within the organization, training, we always are hearing, well, we have a policy, but we're having difficulty rolling it out, getting, people to follow it, people to understand it, understand why it's important, so we can have a policy on paper, but how do we make sure that people are engaged and following, and what does training look like? So I think that's one thing I definitely hope that we could touch on today. Training tips. I know there's a NAVEX Global. They issue a different risk and compliance benchmark report on a regular basis. And in 2023, one of their markers that they released, or one of the stats, said that compliance and risk professionals say their top policy management challenges were training employees on policy. And that's 42% of the respondents. And I thought that was really interesting, because I think that's what we hear too.
Yeah, and we see it a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, I just hope to kind of open that topic and talk a little bit about it. I think there's a misconception sometimes that, okay, we've written the policy, here it is, it's very clear, it's concise, you can read it, or we can sit down and read it together, I'll read it to you, or I'll break it up and I'll put it on slides and then we can go through it. But I think that training is much more than that, so what are some of the different methods? And, I think it just depends on the organization, how you're structured. These days, organizations certainly are more often than not really kind of remote. Can you do a recording, that's kind of engaging and interesting? That can be used over and over again, or accessed, as part of like onboarding. I think that that's a really popular approach from what I see, and it seems to be pretty successful. There's like games, of course, try to make it fun. And I've heard all sorts of things as far as what that looks like. So yeah.
Another one that I think about is just awareness, and the group here at Zazio that's doing a really good job these days is cybersecurity. They've always got something up on the bulletin board that gives you like a quick fact that's meant to kind of scare you into not clicking on those links in your email. But just having awareness, and our most kind of mature RIM clients are doing similar things about RIM, just interesting little facts that they're posting around places in the workplace that just try to keep records management and information management top of mind. And I think that goes a long ways to keeping people aware of it, and keeping it as something that they think about and hopefully prioritize.
Yeah,
for sure. Those are excellent insights. I think several things here. One, going back, before you put your policy in place. And a great way to preview it to your stakeholders is focus grouping.
Mm-hmm.
Try focus grouping your policy to your stakeholders before it's out. Give them the your draft, your final draft. Ask them to read it, apply it, and hear their feedback. What does this make sense? Is this useful? Is this helpful? Are there any questions? Anything I got confused on? And then modify it from there. And then once it's in place, this is one of those areas I think where it's hard to over communicate. That email going out to your stakeholders saying, here's our new policy, let us know of any questions is not nearly enough. Use every opportunity that you can think of to communicate that policy, whether it's having a helpful cheat sheet on your company's intranet, hosting multiple trainings, and break them down. Go to each different group and train them individually, follow up with them, ask them for questions, send out reminders, and you can frame those as like policy wins. So okay, we had this policy's been in place for 3 months, and we've had these things happen that were very good examples of successful execution. Keep up the good work, and that helps communicate to other groups that okay, this is how I can carry this policy out correctly. And then I think that the general rule is you should review your policies for updates at least annually. And so, I mentioned early in the presentation that we for smaller companies, ASIO has a lot of policies. And so as a few years ago, as we started to really transition hard on the software side in from on-premise into SaaS, SaaS is an area where because of cybersecurity, as Rick mentioned, there's a lot of issues to navigate and a lot of policies that we need to control the process and keep information secure. And so in building out our comprehensive information security system with a lot of policies involved in it, we spent a lot of time on them, got to the endpoint and implemented them, but every year since then, we've gone back and made a lot of changes, both to substantively as we figured out things that work better, and the industry changes rapidly, and so you've got to incorporate new things into them, and then just incorporate people's feedback and continue to refine them. So once you get that first final version out the door, your work is far from over.
Yeah. I like that you highlighted that, Will. I guess I think about it as it's just as important to receive communication, open that door, and make yourself or somebody available to make sure that people have questions or feedback, and not just on a one-time basis, but on a regular basis. Who do they reach out to if there's issues with understanding how the policy works or how they should follow it? So equally as important, just making sure you're communicating it clearly, is that you keep that channel of communication open on an ongoing basis, and people are able to provide that feedback. One thing I'm also kind of thinking about too is, moving forward, is just how do you, checking in on a regular basis to see how things are being followed, or whether the policy is being followed, and even though nobody likes to be part of an audit, it's an opportunity to really gather that feedback, that valuable feedback, and it's important too. So I know that that's kind of part of what we hear a lot about, and how do I really monitor this, and how do I, kind of gauge what compliance looks like, how people are following it or whatnot. But those check-ins are also opportunities to get important feedback and see what needs to be changed moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of ideas there. One is, yes, absolutely, in keeping with the theme that your policy's done, your work is far from over, auditing and ensuring compliance essential to make sure it's being followed, and then also to be able to adjust your policy if need be. Auditing is kind of a harsh word. I like to think of it as an opportunity for engagement with your stakeholders.
Yeah, that sounds less scary.
Yeah, I mean, it really is about continuing to, it's really about continuing to engage with your stakeholders. And so, one of the things you're communicating with your policy is trust. In the tone of the policy, you really want to say, I trust you, I have confidence in you, and that, feedback that you're in, that ongoing conversation you're having with your stakeholders reinforces that trust. And two, you want to make really clear that and this goes to the earlier point of punishment and discipline. Your main goal here is to further the organization's mission and bring everybody in that organization along with that success. And so the real purpose here is not punishment. It's not command and control. It's getting better and promoting compliance, solving problems with your stakeholders rather than using that heavy-handed stick. And so you really want to be careful to communicate that in continuously engaging in feedback with your stakeholders isn't designed to catch mistakes and punish. It's to improve everybody's operations, make them more successful at their job, and continue to educate and bring everybody along towards compliance.
It's a positive way to think of it. I like that.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One more slide. We're about out of time. I just wanted to pass along a very helpful resource that I've come across and use a lot. In 2010, I think the Congress passed a law kind of commanding every arm of the federal government to speak in plain language, to kind of bring it down. I don't want to say dumb it down. That's not a good term, but be less bureaucratic and more effective in their communications. And so we came up with the Federal Plain Language Guidelines, which is, a lot of the things I've talked about today are included in this document. And, the document also practices what it preaches, and giving a great visual example of how you really lay things out in a simple, well-organized, succinct way that draws the reader in instead of pushing them away. And so anybody's writing a policy document, I encourage them to check this resource out. It's free, and it contains a wealth of useful information to help you write your policies more successfully.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Will. I did kind of take a peek at it, and I think it's a wonderful resource. Lots of good stuff there.
Okay, well, Rick, Jen, anything else?
Well, I would just remind everybody that if there's any questions, as follow-up for the webinar today, please feel free to send them our way. We're happy to follow up and provide any additional feedback or anything that might be helpful. So we welcome those questions. And Rick, do you want to introduce our next the ARMA webinar series coming up?
Yes. First, I want to say thank you, Will. You were an amazing guest on Virtual Coffee. I think that a lot of people will get a lot out of the things that you presented on. I hope they do, because I have. And I really hope, I'm going to put you on the spot here, that you'll come back and join us again for a future virtual coffee.
Absolutely. Happy to come back anytime. Really appreciate the invitation and really enjoyed chatting about these issues with you all.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thanks,
so
Will.
Stay tuned, everyone. We've got another ARMA webinar series coming up August 22nd. Warren is going to be presenting on move or manage, determine when manage in place makes sense. And I think one of our consulting team will probably be joining that one as well. And so that's coming up in August. And then our next virtual coffee will be in late summer, early fall. Stay tuned for details. So thanks, everyone.
almost a pumpkin spice latte season. I'm
Yeah.
getting that for myself. So thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.